Hello all, good afternoon. Today we are going to have our last talk in the theme of models of computational thinking by Professor Jaya Srivalsan Nair. She is going to present on geometric signatures of LiDAR point clouds. Professor Jaya Nair obtained her PhD in computer science from the University of California, Davis. She is an associate professor in IIITB. She worked as a scientific programmer at NTHOT at Austin and as a research associate in the University of Texas at Austin. Her research areas are visualization, scientific computing, computer graphics, and computational geometry. She has been working on problems in spatial analytics with a focus on applications in the Earth observations of LiDAR point clouds and ocean data, biological networks of gene interactions and brain connectivity networks, survey data pertaining to population health and public health, and chart image processing. She leads graphics visualization and computing lab at IIITB and is part of a core team of EHRC, that is eHealth Research Center at IIITB. She is a recipient of the Early Career Research Award from the Science and Engineering Research Board of Government of India. I welcome her to present her talk for our Samvad series.
Thanks, Rani, for the nice introduction. So today's talk that is on geometric signatures of LiDAR point clouds is a work that my student Pragyan and I are working on, and we have just submitted a journal paper. So I am going to show you salient points of our work in this particular paper. So unlike the several other talks we have had, this is not going to be an overview talk. This is going to be pertaining to the singular work that we have done in the last few months. Okay, so I begin. I'll first introduce what LiDAR technology is all about. LiDAR technology is a remote sensing technology which is used widely for several purposes. The idea here is to get elevation information, and there are several means of acquiring this data set. So the LiDAR data that is acquired is typically in two forms. One is imagery and the other one is point clouds. And there are different forms of LiDAR. So the one that you see on the left here is airborne LiDAR, which is aerial LiDAR, which is usually captured using low-flying aircraft or using drones. And the one on the right that you see here is vehicle LiDAR or mobile LiDAR, which is used for autonomous vehicles. There are two more types of LiDARs, which is essentially terrestrial LiDAR, which is used for scanning buildings at the ground level. And then the last one is satellite LiDAR, which is captured using satellites. So these are the broadly four different kinds of LiDAR. And this particular talk is focused on airborne LiDAR. So what are point clouds? Point clouds, as I mentioned, are elevation data. So these are just a set of points, three-dimensional points, which give you XYZ location. Each LiDAR point cloud data can have different attributes to it depending on the instrument that is used to collect the data. It could have intensity values, it could have return values, and it could have several such values. But the bare minimum that most LiDAR point cloud data has is the point data itself. So this is a set of, say, 1 million or 1 trillion points which describe a certain region, and this is essentially captured when when electromagnetic radiation is emitted from the LiDAR instrument and reflected back to the sensor. So the time it takes to go and come back is essentially what gives the elevation value. And depending on the use case of LiDAR, the electromagnetic spectrum that it covers is different. So for example, most LiDAR instruments cover near infrared range of the electromagnetic radiation. But for the one that is used in oceans, like for bathymetric LiDAR, it may cover in the green band because it can then see through the oceans to look at, to measure elevation of the seabed. Okay, so this is broadly what the data that we are talking about, and in this particular work we have looked at just the airborne LiDAR. So the problem that we are talking about today is about how we can compare different LiDAR point clouds. So just to give you instances where we will need to compare point clouds are essentially when we are integrating multimodal data. As in, suppose I have data sets which is from terrestrial LiDAR and from mobile LiDAR, how would I integrate them, right? So the point clouds will have different spatial resolutions, point densities, different orientations, and so on and so forth. So essentially, that's one of the use cases of where we would compare point clouds. The second use case is where I have collected the point clouds across different time frames, as in I have collected it in 2006 and now I'm collecting it again in 2009, right? So I may not use the same instrument to start with, I may not use the same platform to start with, I may not even use the same mode. Say in 2006 I collected using low-flying aircraft, in 2009 I might as well use like drones or whatever, right? Whatever is the state of the art there. But still, what we want to do is we want to capture changes across the time frames. In the first case, it's more of an integration, as in I have data sets of the same time frame and I want to integrate them even though they are in different orientations and so on and so forth. The second use case is typically associated with changes over time. Okay, so let's look at what kind of changes are we talking about. So this is an example of the damage done by Hurricane Katrina. And this is the LiDAR point clouds that were collected between 2004 and 2005 to kind of indicate how the scenario was before the hurricane hit the coast versus after it hit. And this is kind of showing the receding line of the coastline. So this is one use case of LiDAR point clouds, of comparing LiDAR point clouds. Here what we are looking at is urban regions, what kind of changes do we see over time, right? So here we are looking at two time stamps of the LiDAR data that is collected. One was collected in 2006 and the other one was collected in 2009, and we are looking at what kind of changes have been captured by the LiDAR point clouds. Okay, so this is essentially the different kinds of changes that have been captured using point clouds. So if you look at the changes that have been recorded for change in urban areas, typically includes things like where are the new buildings, where did buildings change height, for instance. So you added 2 stories. So for example, if we take the LiDAR point cloud of the Ramanujan block compared to what it was a year ago, it will show something totally different now, right? And the other one is a building that has been demolished, new trees, and felled trees as in deforestation, and unchanged area. Yeah, that's it. I don't know as much about the data acquisition. So I think it should be relatively low. So it depends what the platform for moving around the room is, right? So you can do it using a tripod. You can also use a mobile device to acquire data. So it really depends on what kind of LiDAR instrument you would be using. That said, it depends on the area of the room for you to capture that amount of data. Typically, indoor LiDAR data are known to be denser than the outdoor ones. So so I don't know how much time it takes to acquire data.
How long they can remain airborne?
Yes, I do not know the answer for that, yeah. Yeah, so our interest is largely for a use case like this where we are looking at urban areas, and what we quickly figured out is most of these things relate to change in the semantic class. So for a particular point, it would have probably belonged to a building earlier, now it belongs to a tree, right? As in the building got demolished and maybe new trees were planted there, or which is not the usual scenario. Usual scenario is a trees got cut and a building got built there, right? So typically it has to do with some kind of change in the semantic classes, right? So let's look at what are the gaps in these kind of methods. So typically when you are using methods for understanding change in LiDAR point clouds, just like in any other point cloud data that you would encounter in geometry or computer graphics, and so on and so forth. The first thing that anybody would do registration. Registration just means that you find a bunch of landmark points in one point cloud and make sure that you correspond it to the same set of landmark points in the next point cloud, and then match everything else around it. That's essentially what registration is. And this particular work that I showed in the previous slide, they had used a pretty robust method which is called the iterative closest point method, which is an optimization method used for finding registration. But their requirement comes as the points already have to be in good initial state. What does good initial state mean? It means that the landmark points should match from point cloud 1 to point cloud 2 and so on and so forth. The orientations have to be set appropriately. There shouldn't be any distortions. The noise should be less and so on and so forth. So the expectation between the quality of the point clouds is already predetermined or preset in these kind of methods, which is usually not guaranteed most times. The other thing that they found is the differences in point density made it hard to figure out changes. So suppose you have a few points indicating a single tree, most times it would get removed as noise, right? So on and so forth, which is not desired. Again, it's not like this method doesn't work. We are looking for a method which sort of closes these gaps, right? So we came up with this method which is called the geometric signature. So the idea here is as I mentioned earlier, our requirement was to identify the change across different classes, as in a point which belonged to a particular region in a particular semantic class would definitely change to another semantic class, and that's essentially what the change that we want to capture, right? So what we have done here is we then said that we don't then require the three-dimensional the context. We can as well remove it, and when we remove it, can we make sure there is enough in a signature for each class that will indicate what the change would be when I change from class 1 to class 2. Okay. When I talk of classes, the classes which are usually covered in urban areas are tree, building, low vegetation, and road. So these are the generic classes which you would find in any point cloud which pertains to urban regions. And from our previous work, we had done this thing called geometric classification, where we try to understand when there is a point in a point cloud, what type of geometry does it belong to? Does it belong to a line? Does it belong to a surface, as in the surface of a wall? Or does it belong to a surface on the road? When I say line, it just means edges of buildings and so on and so forth. And the last class is critical points. Critical points refer to the junctions, like when the corners in buildings and so on and so forth would be critical points. We have also identified from our previous work that points which don't have any kind of characteristic geometric behavior, like for example points on foliage, will also tend to be critical points because there's nothing that they can identify in terms of being on a surface or a line. Okay, so that's essentially what the geometric classification is. So as a total of what we have done is we took the geometric classification. We figured out that there is this thing called probabilistic geometric classification, where it would say the likelihood of a point to belong to any of the geometric classes. We put them in a barycentric coordinate system. So that's essentially what the geometric signature is. And then once we did that, we figured that now we are free to add colors to it. So what's the best thing to add now? I can add the semantic classes information, as in which class do each of these points belong to. I can color code it, and now I have something called the augmented semantic signature. Okay, so again, some of these terminologies we came up with. In our paper in 2015, we came up with this terminology called augmented semantic classification, where it meant for each point I have a tuple of classes. One is the geometric class and one is the semantic class. Now in this particular work, we change it a little bit, where the earlier one, it was a deterministic classification, as in I had a point belong to one geometric class or the other. Here I would say that I have a saliency map of each point belonging to partially to all the classes. So that is essentially what the probabilistic geometric classification is all about. Okay. So what we have come down to is we have eliminated the requirement of registration now, because all I'm doing is I'm kind of transforming this 3D space to this 2D space, which is inside a triangle, and I'm mapping all these points inside here. So I just do this transformation to change this to this, and then I can make it better by using color, and even if I want, I can use icons depending on if my visualization will allow me to do that. And then we say that we can compare signatures instead as a way of comparing point clouds itself. So that is kind of the work that we have done. Okay. So as I mentioned, we are doing spatial transformations here. So here the spatial information of a point is it's XYZ, but here the spatial information of the point is it's probabilistic geometric classification. That is CL, CS, CP. That is the probability of a point belonging to the line type feature, probability of it belonging to the surface type feature, and the point type feature. So that's essentially what we have done here. Okay. And the idea here is we assume we are going to see drastic changes between the signatures of some of the classes at least, or the classes of our interest, and because there is going to be inherent changes in the signatures of the classes themselves, we will see enough change in the signatures of the point cloud when we look at it in this format. So that is the idea here. Okay.
That left top geometric classification, we can, from this distance we can see only green and black. So do these colors superimpose on top of each other?
You mean this one?
Yes.
So it's green, blue, and red. It's some combination of it.
Okay.
So this is a better representation depending on how we compute this likelihood. There was another likelihood measure that we looked at where we had CL and CS being half-half, so we would get like yellow color. So that is a bad thing. As in here, it's saying predominantly it belongs to one of these classes. So it's a better way of figuring out the geometric classification.
Okay. And is it like?
I get. Thank you. Okay. So in this particular thing, it's more of, you can look at it in the TV screen there. So it's not really black. It's mostly blue and red and green.
Right on, is it?
It's not colorblind friendly. Sorry. Okay.
No, I'm not colorblind.
Okay.
So no, the question is, is it possible that two different combinations of colors will lead to one composite color which cannot then be mapped back to its constituent colors?
It could be. So here what we are just saying is we want to see what its geometric classification is going to be. So given a point, where would it be? So ideally, if you look at it visually, you can see that the red lines are sort of following along the edges of buildings, so which kind of indicate it to be a correct one. And you see green mostly, which is essentially surfaces. So these are roads, right? And the trees are the blue ones, which are the critical points. You get them as critical points because they don't have good geometric representation. So those. But again, I'll tell you in a bit that depending on, so this is also not a, it's not a, there's no standards for this. So depending on what you do to compute this geometric classification, for any data set it can change. I'll show you in a bit. Okay, so we'll look at probabilistic geometric classification, and this is essentially one of the ways we are also looking to study uncertainties in geometry, which is some of the ongoing work that we are looking at. So how do we arrive at this geometric classification? So first thing we have to do is, for each point we have to identify local neighborhood, How we identify local neighborhood itself has a few choices, right? So just to make our life more interesting, so we can choose cylindrical neighborhoods, we can choose spherical neighborhoods, we can choose grid or octant or octree or whatever based neighborhoods, and we can also have k nearest neighborhoods. So depending on what you choose to be your to be a good metric for your local neighborhood, you can choose. And different applications use different local neighborhoods. So for most of the things that we are talking about in terms of classification, typically spherical is used and k nearest is used. Cylindrical is usually used for removing outliers when it comes to geometric reconstruction and so on and so forth. So these are the different local neighborhoods. Once you find the local neighborhoods, you have to figure out what the shape of that local neighborhood is. It can be a cylinder, which is like one dimension, it is going to be longer. It can be a disk, that means it's like a plate and it is a surface, or it can be a sphere where it is equally influential in all the three directions. So that's essentially the different shapes of the local neighborhood. Now, since it's used for this, we are also calling these data structures that we use for computing these classes to be, we call them as local geometric descriptors. So the idea here is we use local geometric descriptors, which I'll tell you like what different kinds of local geometric descriptors we can get. Once we get the local geometric descriptors, which are usually in a matrix form, which is a second order tensor, a physical tensor, we can then do eigenvalue decomposition of it, and that will tell us what these shapes are based on its eigenvalues. So if you have one eigenvalue which is very much bigger than the others, you would get a cylindrical type. If you have two eigenvalues which are comparable and the third one is insignificant, you would get a disk-like, and when all three are comparable, you get spherical. So that is the idea here, okay? So what are the different geometric descriptors we can use? So one is a usual thing which is called the covariance tensor. The covariance tensor is otherwise also called covariance matrix. So the way we compute the covariance matrix is for all the neighbors that you have identified in a local neighborhood, you can compute the variance of x value, covariance between x and y values, covariance between x and z values, and so on and so forth. Now this one is regularly used in computer vision applications and in similar things where point clouds are used. The next one is something that our team proposed, which is using tensor voting. Tensor voting is used in computer vision for perceptual organization of points and lines and structures, other geometric structures. So we quickly learned that just using tensor voting is not sufficient for this for the geometric descriptors that we are looking at. We needed to do another process which is called the anisotropic diffusion. I won't get into details here. I'll just show you how they look different. So this is the covariance tensor. If I look at the representation of the tensors, what I see here is I get line features, and this is what I get if I just use tensor voting, which starts out with starting with spherical tensors, and then when I do anisotropic diffusion, I get a proper structure like this. And you can kind of see that these lines are captured very well using tensor voting after anisotropic diffusion. And if you look at here, the points are, the corners are captured much better using covariance tensor and not as well in the tensor voting. So this is sort of the variations we get when we use different local geometric descriptors, because the way they are computed, they do different things. Okay? And so just going back to where we were, right? So we have three different geometry classes, and these are essentially the line type, surface type, and critical point or junction type features. So we come up with this thing called the saliency map. The saliency map is a three-tuple which gives us the likelihood of a point belonging to each of these three classes, which are captured using CL, CS, and CP values. Now, when we retain the CL, CS, CP values, we get a probabilistic geometric classification, because CL plus CS plus CP will give us 1, because all probabilities have to add to 1. And if we choose the maximum of any of the CL, CS, CP values for each of the points, we get deterministic geometric classification. That means a point either belongs to one of the 3 classes. Here we say how its likelihood to belong to any of the 3 classes is what is captured using probabilistic geometric classification. So when you apply a max function, you would get the deterministic geometric classification. Okay. So the other part, when I come from the visualization world, I see is people have done a lot of work in second order tensors. Second order tensors are essentially tensors that you get when you do tensor products of first order tensors. First order tensors are essentially your vector values, which are like your velocity and so on and so forth. Zeroth order tensor is when you have scalars like temperature and so on. And so second order then is represented in the form of matrices. So if you take the derivative of a first order tensor like velocity, acceleration would be a tensor. Okay, so when you look at second order tensors, because they are matrices, you can also do the eigenvalue decomposition and you can find these likelihood values. So we didn't come up with those likelihood values, they are already there in the signs of second order tensors, and there's enough research done to figure out that depending on these values, there is a shape that the tensor would take. So which is essentially where our LiDAR world is meeting the tensor visualization world, where they have already figured out that if there is a CS value, it would be a spherical point, otherwise it will be a linear point if CL value is very high, and if it is a planar point, it would be CP value is very high, and they have already described it in the form of a triangle. So what we have done is, we have taken this representation, which is already there in second order tensors visualization, we have used that for the LiDAR point clouds. So that's essentially what our work is all about. Okay. So now there's another aspect to how we compute the local geometric descriptors, other than choosing what local geometric descriptor we want to compute. There's this notion of scales. So we have had past few talks on scales. So this is essentially the same thing. So here the idea is, because there is so much of variability in outdoor environments in the LiDAR point clouds, typically a single scale will not give you enough information, as in single scale as in a radius for the spherical neighborhood or the k value for the k nearest neighbor. So if I say I will find 10 nearest neighbor, it's unlikely for all the points 10 nearest neighbor is going to give me the best information about that point. So it can vary, right? So what I say now is, I'll take multiple such values. So if I'm using spherical neighborhood, I'll take multiple radii value. If I'm using k nearest neighborhood, I would take multiple k values, and I'll gather information as different tensors. Then the point is, how do I aggregate those tensors? Because I still need only a single tensor to tell me any characteristic of that particular point, right? So what we do then is, we can either aggregate them using an averaging function, which is, but then you can do it only for specific attributes. And we figured out that if we do it for probabilities, it is fine, because we can think of them as independent events, and it is okay to average them across all the different scales. So if we average CL, CS, CP, that is scientifically correct. The other way of doing it is, I can find a single tensor, but for that I can find an optimal scale. So the idea is, which is the scale which gives me the maximum information? That comes from information theory. So I will look at where my entropy is really low, as in uncertainty is very low, and then I would compute that. So the past literature has been where, this is a 2011 paper, where they first started the notion of using optimal scale in LiDAR point clouds. So what they said was, for each of the shapes of the, or the saliencies at each point, I can compute based on the eigenvalue analysis of covariance tensor, which is very widely used. I can then compute the entropy as minus that value, log of that value, natural log of that value, and add it all up, I'll get the entropy value. So this is Shannon's entropy, right? And once I find this entropy, wherever the entropy is the least, is where I would say my optimal scale is. So it's as simple as that, okay? So now once we find the optimal scale, so for each point in the point cloud I can have different scales, and then I compute the tensors for each of those points. So that's essentially how I get the local geometric descriptor, which is not now tied down or constrained by a specific scale. I can find it for the right scale at that point, and then I'll get the correct values. So this is the saliency which is given according to the second order tensor, the work that was done in second order tensor visualization. So these were the likelihoods that were computed. These were the likelihoods that were computed for the LiDAR point clouds when using covariance tensors. So when we used this particular thing, we didn't get very good results, so we continue to use these as the likelihood values. But that's it, you can use anything as likelihood values provided they all add up to 1. So that's the only requirement there. Okay. So here you would get lambda 1 minus lambda 2. This one would be just lambda 2 minus lambda 3, and here you would get lambda 3. So when you add it all up, so you get lambda 1, you should get lambda 1 plus lambda 2 plus lambda 3 in the numerator divided by lambda 1 plus lambda 2 plus lambda 3 in the denominator, and that should give you the right result. I think there's something wrong with this part, I think. So otherwise it should add up. So it will give you 1. So that's the only requirement of the saliency map. Okay, so now we look at how it will get transformed to the barycentric coordinate system. So the barycentric coordinate system has been around for several centuries now. So the idea is, if you have points or values inside a triangle, how would you do interpolation? So this is fairly straightforward. So here what we say is, for each point inside the barycentric coordinate space, I would have its representation to be alpha, beta, gamma, right? So just like in the Cartesian coordinate system we have x, y, z, the barycentric coordinate system is an equivalent when it comes to points in a triangle, right? So what that means is, when I have alpha, beta, gamma, for each of the points, the vertices, I would have 1, 0, 0, 0, 1, 0 and 0, 0, 1. That means alpha is 1 at one of the points, the other two being 0. At the other point, beta would be 1 and the other two would be 0, and so on and so forth. So I have those as the vertices. And then the point is, if I find an alpha, beta, gamma inside, I can say alpha times any property of, say, A1, where alpha is equal to 1, plus beta into any property at A2, plus gamma into any property at A3 is going to be equal to the property at P. So that's the idea here. So it is a linear interpolation function. So that means it is, you just do multiply once and add it all up, you will get the value. So then the question is, how do you come up with this alpha, beta, gamma value, where we have a constraint of alpha plus beta plus gamma is equal to 1. And now this stems from the fact that a triangle is a two-dimensional geometric primitive, and you don't want more than 2 independent variables, because the dimensionality of this coordinate space should be equivalent to the coordinate space that you're looking at. So if that's the case, alpha and beta can be independent, and when you do alpha plus beta plus gamma is equal to 1, gamma becomes dependent. You can choose any 2 of these to be independent and it will be fine. Okay. Now how do we compute alpha, beta, gamma? That's also fairly interesting. So there are multiple ways in which you can compute barycentric coordinates depending on what use case you have. It's regularly used a lot in graphics and geometry. Now in here we are just using the areal barycentric coordinates. That means these barycentric coordinates are computed based on the area value. So what we do here is, when I have alpha is equal to 1 here, so suppose A1 is where my alpha is equal to 1, then I would look at the triangle subtended in the opposite side. So this is the triangle PA2, A3. So if I find the area of this divided by the area of the whole triangle, I would get my alpha at the point P. And similarly, I can find beta at point P and gamma at point P. And when I add it all up, I'm essentially adding all these sub-triangles, which will become the total triangle. So the total triangle by the total triangle, I get the value 1. So this is one way of computing alpha, beta, gamma. Now we know the alpha, beta, gamma because those are the CL, CS, CP values. So what I do now is, given my CL, CS, CP values, I can now find where this point is going to be. That I can find by doing alpha into vertex A, vertex 1, plus beta into vertex 2, plus gamma into vertex 3, and I'll get the point in the barycentric coordinate. So this is how I convert a point in the 3D Cartesian coordinate system to the barycentric coordinate system, and I get the representation. So that is the spatial transformation I do. So once I do this, my original plan was to find comparison of point clouds. So I have to now compare two signatures. So what are the ways in which I do that? So here, as I mentioned, I can augment my my geometric signature using the semantic classes, and I can get augmented semantic signature. So once I do this, I can get two types of signatures. One is this black and white one, and the other one is a colored one. Now why is this important? Because now at this point, because these are standard triangles that we are using, we can now consider this to be an image, right? So what we can reduce is, other than doing point-to-point differences, I can now find the difference between an image of a signature with the image of the other signature, and then evaluate the difference between 2 point clouds. Okay. So another entropy measure that we came up with, this is essentially for enabling our optimal scale computation, is this geometric measure, where we use the saliency map for finding the entropy value. This is slightly different from the other one because the saliency map itself was different earlier. Now when we do all of these, we see interesting patterns. So this is essentially how this geometric signature looks for a set of points when we do tensor voting. So we see that the way tensor voting works is, we find a lot of points which are spherical type, and then we'll try to correct them to the line type and the surface type. So we get this kind of a pattern where a lot of the points are concentrated about the CS value. So sorry, CP value, where it is the point type feature. Now when we transform it using anisotropic diffusion, we see an interesting pattern where we get this. So all that anisotropic diffusion does is, it changes the eigenvalues to exponential values, and it gives you a similar kind of a tensor. So we get this. So we see that there are certain sections of the triangles which never get covered when we use this specific local geometric descriptors. I can give you one more line. So there is theoretical explanation for this based on the way tensor voting is done. So this particular line is where CL is this is the CL value. CL is always less than the rest of the thing. So CL is less than CS in this particular region. Now when we use the anisotropic, when we use the entropy for finding the optimal scale, we see the small dent here. Again, when we do the transformation, that dent becomes a dent in this region. So what we see here essentially is, so this point, which is the centroid here, which is 0.33, 0.33, 0.33, is essentially the point where all classes are equally present, as in a point belongs equally to all the three geometric classes, which is highly uncertain, right? So when we have taken minimal uncertainty, what really happens is, we kind of have this gap here, or a hole here, where we have pushed it as far as possible from the centroid. So this is the signature we get when we use optimal scale. Okay, and this is the signature we would get if we don't use optimal scale. When we use optimal scale, we get this kind of a signature. So we kind of start seeing these interesting patterns, right? And we look at the different factors which influence the signature. So the first thing is the type of local geometric signature we use, local geometric descriptor we use. So we can see here, if we use tensor voting, we see this gap here, which we don't really see when we use covariance tensor, for instance. And depending on the multi-scale aggregation we use, as in this is when we use averaging, and this is when we use optimal scale, we see a clear difference. And the third one is when we use different semantic classes like the road, building, and low vegetation and tree, we will start seeing signatures for those classes. Okay, why do we see that? Because there is enough literature on the different behavior of these values when we look at different classes. So the values that we get for each of these are fairly different when we look at ground versus building versus low vegetation and high vegetation. So this is already there in the literature. So we are expected to see differences in the signatures. Okay. Now we go back to the comparison part. So how do we compare? The first one is fairly straightforward. Assuming we have same number of points in point cloud A and point cloud B, we can just, and we have done registration and all of that, we can just do root mean square errors from point to point and we get the comparison. The other one is something that we came up with, which is essentially using the image based metric. So we consider a standard triangle. So I set what my vertices of the triangle is going to be to capture the signature for each point cloud. Then I find the differences between the signatures, which is in the image form now. So for that, I use regular image processing methods. So for geometric signature, which is in black and white, I can use structural similarity index. For the one that is using colors, I can find histograms of each of the color channels, that is the red, green and blue, and I can use Bhattacharya distance and earth movers distance to find the comparison metric. So these are some of the things that we did. We did do a lot more, but I will, in the interest of time, I will not talk of them, but we have used some information theoretic measures as well. So how did we use this? We simulated a case study because time varying LiDAR point clouds are not very widely available. So we created a time varying point cloud, right? So we thought we will simulate progressive deforestation, which is of interest for urban areas. Now the idea here is we identified if we were to cut a tree, as in remove a tree, what will its new class be? So we used the analytics from how the different class signatures are, and we figured out from a tree it's best if it becomes a low vegetation point. So for the first cut, we did this part where we collected an entire patch of region and converted everything there to trees, and then progressively from a given point set, we started removing regions and converting them from trees to low vegetation. So how did we find these regions? We used a graphical user interface, cut rectangles, and we figured out those rectangles. If there are buildings or trees, we will just convert them to low vegetation. So it was fairly manually done. So how did it look like eventually? It looked something like this. So here we had a whole patch which was converted to trees. This is the original point cloud, right? And this is where we have converted some of the trees, 70% of the trees to low vegetation, and then this is where all the trees have been converted to low vegetation. So this is essentially what we did in terms of the progress in terms of our simulation. Now it could have been that we converted trees to buildings, but it's a harder problem to solve because you have to earmark geometries and then you have to get appropriate heights and things like that. So we avoided doing all of that. From the careful analysis we did, it was sufficient if we convert from tree to low vegetation, we would get a drastic change in the classes itself. So this is the original point cloud which is collected from Vaihingen site in Germany. So we are focusing on these two regions. So this is a region which is near the Enz river, and this is the region which is further away from it. So what we did first was we did some soul searching and figured out which geometric descriptor to use and which aggregation method to use, all of that, right? So this kind of gives us better geometric classification, so we kind of landed on these. So we tried to compare different local geometric descriptors, and this is our result that we got. So you can see that as time progresses, this is from T0 when it's afforested to it becomes completely treeless, how it changes, right? So for each of the descriptors, we kind of see enough change in the signature. So if we look at the augmented semantic signature, it's more informative than the geometric signature. But that said, even the geometric signature does show drastic difference from T0 to T3. Okay, so that's essentially what we have kind of studied. And this is again for the next area, right? So, so these are our main results in terms of the visual comparison. Then we checked when we changed the sampling of a particular point cloud, because we are trying to compare different point clouds which could have different point densities. How would it vary? So we also found that it's quite resilient to the sampling densities, as in if it keeps getting lower until 40% or so, we get similar signatures. Okay, that's mainly because the points are overlapping on each other. Okay, so we performed two types of comparisons. So the first one is we did frame to frame comparison, as in as we go along the timeline, so from one time frame to the consecutive time frame, that we did progressive comparisons. And then we did comparisons with respect to the initial frame to find out cumulative changes in the particular point cloud. And we could see patterns in this one. This one we didn't have enough information to find any patterns, so that could be another study we could make. And we got expected results. And for the image-based metrics, interestingly, it is a WYSIWYG metric. So if we saw drastic changes in the image, in the images of the signatures, we saw drastic changes in the measurements we saw in the Bhattacharya distance and the earth movers distance and all of that. So it was kind of interesting to see that part. So one of the biggest gaps that we found in this particular work is when we look at image-based metric, we also have to understand the occlusion of points. So if I draw a point of a building first, and then on top of it I draw a point of say a low vegetation, I perceive it as a point of low vegetation because that is the one on the top. So the order in which I render the points becomes a big problem here. So that is something that we haven't addressed at all in this particular work. So this can be rectified using transparencies or careful way of adding up the transparencies, something that we have to do, or we have to find a priority function as to which class we are focused on and things like that, and then render the points based on the priority ranking. And we can also do appropriate sampling to give an indication of certain semantic class compositions instead of drawing all the points, because it pretty much overlaps on top of each other. So these are things that we can do next to figure out a better signature for the point cloud if you are going down the image-based metric. Right? So the other thing that we need to say here is there's clearly the spatial context is missing, which is by design. And this particular mapping that we saw is a non-injective surjective function. So if you remember how function mappings are, this is essentially what we have here. So there are multiple points which go to a single point here. So this is my 3D space and this is my barycentric coordinate space. So there will be multiple points which will have this same point in the barycentric space that we have to be aware of, which is where the problem of overlap comes about. And it is onto, right? So all points here will find a function map in the other space that is also there. So I'd like to conclude my talk. So we have proposed a novel signature for point clouds using probabilistic geometric classification. The application of the signatures is for point cloud comparison without having to do point set registration, essentially because of the requirements of registration, and for class-based change detection, right? And we also propose different comparison metrics between the signatures. That's essentially all this work is about. We have used a simulation to kind of showcase or demonstrate the effectiveness of our work. Acknowledgements. This work has been built on top of the work done by my previous and my current students, Beena, Akshay and Satyendra. And this work has been partially supported by a DST grant in the past, and it's currently being supported by my early career research grant. And Pragyan has gotten her Intel India Research Fellowship based on some of the work on uncertainties that we have done. And this is sort of the work that we have done so far. So we first started out with just building visualization tools, and we quickly figured out we can actually do a lot of analysis in the area of classification itself. So in 2015 is when we presented a work on augmented semantic classification in ACM 6 spatial. Then in Darkstool workshop, we presented a work on geometric classification where we talked of tensor fields representation of the descriptors and all of that and the probabilistic method. Then soon we did some work on geometric reconstruction, but we focused on very specific kinds of roofs where these are simple cabled roofs, and this happened over the 2017-18. We have a IEEE journal paper out of this, and this is the current work. This is under review right now. And what else are we doing? So we have tried to move on from airborne LiDAR. So Satyendra is working on terrestrial LiDAR, and Pragyan and Dhwani are working on mobile LiDAR, which is for autonomous vehicles. So this is where we are at. Thank you. And I can leave it at the conclusion slide.
Could you just add a line or two on that occlusion problem?
Yeah, sure. So when I say, okay, so this is a good place to start from. So this is essentially how the transformation happens. So I have a set of unique points in 3D space, but they could have similar geometric classification. Like some points, two different points on a building edge can also have similar geometric classification, right? So essentially what will happen is when I put them in the triangle here in the barycentric coordinate system, right? Here, when we go here, right? So this particular point here is described by this alpha, beta, gamma, where these are the CL, CS, CP values. So depending on whatever CL, CS, CP values I have computed in the 3D space, they will all come and sit on this particular point, this P point here, right? Now when I do use graphics to render this, like for example I use OpenGL to render this, OpenGL has this pipeline architecture. So as the points come by, it will draw. So if I have a list of points, a vector of points, the points which earlier had that particular thing would get drawn first, and the ones I called like towards the end of my for loop will get drawn on top of it. So if the point sizes are the same, right, unless I define different point sizes for each point, for now the point sizes are the same. So what I would have drawn as magenta point would now get overlap with the yellow point. So that is essentially occlusion. So it's like I've stacked it all on top of each other like pancakes, and I can only see the topmost pancake. That is a problem.
So I was just wondering, maybe naive.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, sure.
if suppose we had some control on the opacity of the layers of colors, and we somehow make sure that we use color codes in such a way that if they overlay on each other,
Yes.
they will always lead to a unique
It's a hard problem to solve because you have 4 different classes here. So it's a combinatorial problem. So I do not know how, so it is like I can have 4C3, right? I can have that many combinations on each point, right? So given that I can, no, it's not 4C3, sorry, it's 2 power 4 actually, right? So I can have that many different colors based on any of the class being there versus not being there. So it's a 2 power 4 combinations. And that means that I need 2 power 4 different colors to indicate that this is the combination I have. That is one way to go about it. If I use opacities, colors get mixed in graphics because opacity is typically used for generating transparencies in graphical rendering. So when I have colors mixing, so if it is completely transparent, then I don't see a lot of colors. So I want it to not be completely transparent. I want it to be somewhat translucent. And if that happens, then they start mixing. So then the mixture, it gets very hard to figure out. It is somewhat like that surjective, non-injective mapping really. So you can have a different set of colors give the same color eventually. That said, you can, so one thing we could do is we can figure out how many such combinations happen, as in how many such points get overwritten, and then have a specific color for that. It probably will not be 2 power 4. It will be much lesser in real life scenarios. So then we can have different colors for that. We did that for one of our work earlier, where they insisted on colorblind friendly palette. So the thing that we had for this particular thing where we had scales for CL, CS, CP, we couldn't have it anymore because red and green cannot be together for colorblind friendly palettes. So then we figured out 4 different combinations where there is combination of each of these saliency maps, and then we gave it different colors, and then we did the rendering. So yeah, it's a whole science in itself, unfortunately or fortunately. You have a question?
Jaya, in the geometry classification, how do you validate the results?
So there is no validation. It's mostly visual because there is no ground truth there for you to validate the results. So that's it. The way geometric classification is currently used, it's not used in it's not called out as geometric classification and used. On the other hand, there are features which are extracted from geometric classification and passed as feature vector into semantic classification and run in several supervised learning algorithms. So it is not used as such. Most of the methods that we have done, we have used geometric classification in a big way because we feel that if that is what is capturing the signature of a point, it is capable of doing more than just sitting in a feature vector for semantic classification. So that has been sort of the crux of most of the work that we have done. Sachit had a question. Nobody else has a question.
Slide where you have this chart of the simulation time flow and the triangle.
Yeah,
What is
sure.
that? Yeah.
This one? Yeah.
So, I mean, again, as Sujit would say, it's a very naive question, but
Yeah. Yeah.
see, at every time instant, I would have one information from the topmost row, right?
Yes.
So, what is the point of the triangle?
So this one is mainly for us to qualitatively see, right? So most times
the leader is not telling me that it is green or purple or something. That's why you're putting them in the triangles.
Yeah. So the thing is, there is a standing gap in finding quantitative methods of finding comparisons between 2 point clouds, right? Which is an elaborate process. So here we have used the same point cloud. So the number of points is the same. The point density is the same. So if we can visualize, that is fine. But most times, most papers don't want just visualizations like he had asked, right? What is the validation? You need quantitative validation. So once you have this, here it's just a visualization. But we have then used this to compute. We have found metrics based on this to find the differences between the point clouds. Right? So that is where the real work is. Okay. So you can see the differences yourself, and most times the idea is you can even see the differences after you have done the semantic classification. But most times you can even see the differences without doing semantic classification. So if you look at the geometric signatures themselves, they vary quite a bit, right? So the point is also to make that you don't have to wait until you do your semantic classification to actually find the differences between your point cloud thing, which you probably would not be able to capture as much if you were to do just 3D rendering. So if you were to do 3D rendering of this point cloud with just black color, it gets very hard. It is very dense, so it will get very hard for you to see the changes in the differences, and you don't have good depth perception when you start rotating and translating that 3D point cloud. So you won't be able to capture most of the differences. You will be able to capture, you can say some changes happen, but how much changes happened is something that you can't quantify using just 3D rendering of the point cloud.
So what you have shown there is one plane.
It's not one plane. This is the top view of the point cloud. So it would look very different. So if you look at this particular image, this kind of tells you how so this is somewhat of a better representation of the 3D rendering, because this is tilted a bit, and this is the best representation because these are actually showing the roofs in that fashion. So you will see point clouds which are sparse but dense, but you can't tell much. So that is the problem. But that said, semantic classifiers have become fairly strong now, so most people are able to use deep learning and supervised learning to doing the thing. But then there are other practical issues. So For example, for the training data, a lot of the annotations are done manually. And when it comes to point clouds, which are like million points, you need experts to actually know how the points would be in the site and then color them. Like look at a whole bunch of cadastral maps and OpenStreetMaps and do a bunch of verifications and then do the annotation. Yeah. So it's not an easy problem. So what we are trying to say is, can we even like say things without having to do the semantic classification? To a certain extent we are able to, but not to a great extent. And the point is to come up with methods which you can use to alleviate the gaps. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, everybody.